Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Wendy. And thank you, everybody involved in Federation, the leadership here. It's really an inspiration to me, to come to a community that is so focused on moving things forward, on continuing to grow, on continuing to develop, and to do so where we're, living up in the New York area now, where you have so many resources at your disposal. I had actually lived prior to that in Atlanta, which is not quite the same size and whatnot, but I understand what it's like to operate in different types of environments. And we know that the key thing, as was mentioned before, is staying together. When you have that sense of community, when you have that sense of mission, and you're all focused on what ultimately is best for your immediate community, a lot of good things happen. And you've been blessed in many ways, I understand, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you some ideas tonight, if I could, that I think will help each of you as individual affiliates and the Federation at large continue along your mission and your purpose. So thank you again for inviting me to be here. I thought I would begin just with a brief message about a time of year that I think may be slightly appreciated and perhaps even a bit misunderstood. So we're in the Sephira period now. The Sephira is the counting between Passover, between Pesach and Shavuot, and it corresponds to the historical moment in Jewish history according to Jewish calendar countings in the year 2448. Now we're in the year 5777, which is the same combination as my shed, so just, the way that I remember things. But a few thousand years ago, and so the Jews went from being slaves in a foreign land to having this supernatural Exodus experience. And then 7 weeks elapsed between that first period and the period of Shavuot, where Moses ascends to Mount Sinai and receives the Torah, the tablets. We all know the story. And this period in between seems to sort of just be a filler in a way. Yet, we have this mitzvah, we have this commandment. And in many ways, it's a strange commandment because, number one, it's tied to a particular sacrifice. There was a sacrifice, very unusual, because in the temple in Jerusalem, typically the sacrifices involved, if there was any meal sacrifice, it was flour. Wheat flour was considered to be the highest quality grain. You typically didn't find anything other than wheat. Yet on the second day of Passover, a barley offering was offered. Second day, so that would be the first day of the intermediate period in Israel. And they brought this offering, and then from then, that's called the Omer. Omer is actually a measure. That's the amount of manna that fell in the desert per person, an Omer per person. That Omer offering was offered on the second day of Passover, and from that time we begin to count. And we count day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and that's why it's called Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. But the Omer seems to be completely irrelevant to the sequence that we're describing over here. We're talking about a journey of people who are going from the land of Egypt to Mount Sinai. As Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, one of the great Jewish thinkers of the 19th century, talks about, he says Passover represents the physical birth of the Jewish people, whereas Shavuot represents the spiritual birth of the Jewish people. And so we became a nation on Passover, but we didn't receive our identity in the truest sense of the term, our mission, our purpose statement, if you will, until we surrounded Har Sinai and we heard God's word from the mountain. So what does this have to do with a barley offering that was offered, and how does it all seem to tie together? So the same Rabbi Hirsch says a fascinating thing. He says the reason that there was this barley offering is because in the land of Israel, barley is, and it's probably true elsewhere as well, the earliest crop. We call it the winter crop. And so the farmers would harvest this barley in April, we call it in Nisan, and they would bring a sacrifice with a portion of this barley in Jerusalem. And he said, now I happen to love to garden. In fact, I was reminded of that yesterday when I logged into an account that I typically don't, and the first security question was, what is your favorite warm weather activity? And I looked at it, I said, I must have chosen gardening. And I did that, and I got it. But I don't like fighting weeds, but it's part, it goes with the territory. Anyway, so you know what it's like if you've ever gardened. You know what it's like to reap your harvest. And if you have a little home garden in the backyard and you grow peppers or tomatoes or whatever it is, obviously you enjoy the benefit of the produce, but you really enjoy the benefit of the fruits of your labor, so to speak. The idea that you worked hard and you achieved something. When it comes to this barley sacrifice, Rabbi Hirsch is saying that the farmers, you would think that that would be the beginning and end, so to speak, of their joy, right? We worked hard, we planted this barley, we've harvested now, we've got the return, let's celebrate, right? And back then, when you didn't have insecticides, you didn't have control over weather, you didn't have easy time with irrigation, right? A harvest was a real time to celebrate, it really was. And we know what happens when harvests go sideways. So you would think that that would be the end of the process. And yet, the mitzvah comes, the commandment comes to tell us, no, that's just the beginning. You have your material needs, you have your financials in order, so to speak, you've got your barley, you've got your food. Now it's time to really seek out your purpose. Now it's time to really go after your true mission. Now it's time to go for the prize that can only be found at the top of the mountain. And so we count. But unlike normal counting, somebody's birthday, an anniversary, an event, my talk tonight, of course you're all counting down, right? Naphtali's going to be here 60 days, 59, right? Every day you pull one off the count, I'm just kidding. But you get the idea. Typically that's how we operate. But when it comes to this, we count up. Because we have to realize that we're on an upward trajectory, and that each day is supposed to bring us a little bit closer to the destination that is Sinai, the destination that is our spiritual mission. And so I think it's very fitting as we talk about Federation, we talk about our affiliates, all of you have a mission, all of you have a purpose, and all of us, we know, obviously as the rabbis say, im ein kemach ein Torah, if you don't have the flour, you can't have the learning because you need to sustain yourselves. So it's a two-part mission. Right? On the one hand, we need the financials in order to achieve our goals, but we realize that our goals are never the financials alone. Our goals are always the mission, the purpose, the ideas and the values that we appreciate and that we aspire for that lie behind them. And I thought that was relevant to our topic tonight of change and change management, simply because it is a transition time. If you think about what I was just saying, the idea of going from a slave to a free man, to an elevated spiritual free man, so to speak, that's a lot of change in 7 weeks, right? You can just imagine, right? Somebody goes off to, a summer camp or for a seven-week hiatus or maybe a mission or something, and they come back completely transformed. It doesn't usually happen for more than a few minutes. They're inspired, but life goes on. But here we're talking about a transformation. There was no turning back. This was life-altering forever. So maybe we can sort of pick up on the idea of change, pick up on the idea of inspiration, so that we can take the learning from tonight and make it a lasting impact and imprint on all of our work. And I hope that that is ultimately the outcome of our conversation this evening. So without further ado, now I just need to make sure that I can get this to read this.
I can make that.
Okay, I just have to snap my fingers and everything is good. Thank you. Okay, may I borrow this for just a moment? Okay, in the interim, hopefully everybody got a packet. Okay, the packet, similar to the last time, is designed to accompany the PowerPoint, at least on the front end. There are other items that we will get to as the evening goes on. Probably not, or maybe yes. Probably more or less in the order in which you see it in the packet. Could I trouble you when you have a moment for a packet as well? Thank you. I forgot I'm using I have my own handy-dandy little transition toy. Okay. So let's jump right into it, and I'm going to ask you to take a look at this slide over here. And this slide I made up with a particular incident in mind. I had gone, this is when I was a head of school down in Atlanta, and I had gone to an event with my board chair, she and I. We went to this event together. All the affiliate schools in the community were invited, and everybody came, head of school and board chair. And this was an idea, the evening was designed to help the head of school and the board chair to work more effectively with one another, to better understand each other's perspectives, which I know everybody in the room appreciates, because all of us deal with this dynamic of ensuring that the leadership is on the same page and moving sort of in the same direction. But I must be very honest with you, and I hope that your outcome tonight will be better than mine that night. I remember nothing from that session, honestly, except for one slide. This is my slide, it's not his. But the presenter, the consultant that was talking to us, talked about hills that heads die on. Hills that heads die on. Now, I don't know if that means anything to you, okay? But the way that it was utilized was that he presented real-life scenarios of heads of school or heads of organizations that, quote-unquote, died on the hill because of a decision that they made that involved change. But take a look at the types of decisions that we're talking about here. Okay, and I hope you're able to read these. Okay? By the way, this is actually in the book, and I'll get to the book a little bit later. But the book is really, to a large degree, an outgrowth of what I learned along the way. But this sounds kind of petty, right? These issues don't seem like they're a big deal, but in one form or another, over time, I don't think it was necessarily one event by itself. But I think what we might say, to use the Hebrew phrase, it was the makeh b'patish, the final blow of the hammer, maybe in a situation where the relationship wasn't quite great to begin with. I'm not exactly sure the nuances in that case, but people have been fired for petty things. Issues have arisen because of pettiness at times. Change, which we think are good changes. Sometimes we think, oh, it's brilliant, it's obvious, everybody should be thinking like me. But not everybody does. And sometimes, as a result of you trying to move through your change process, you get a wall of resistance that you never would have anticipated, just because change is a scary word for many people, right? We know we like to get out of bed each day on the same side. We like to put our clothing on in the same basic sequence. We like to put this shoe on before this shoe. We like to brush this side of our teeth before that side of our teeth. We are creatures of habit. Now, some of it is not things we think about consciously. We sort of just do it. That's habitual. But nonetheless, there are aspects of our behavior where we just like to do it this way because why not? It's always worked, whatever the rationale might be. And yet, we know that that's not always the best way forward. And I don't know that we'll have time to get to it tonight because I know that we have a limited amount of time. But if we don't, and I'm going to ask you not to look at it right now, but I did include in the back a number of quotes associated with change that I think you'll find to be insightful. I think you'll find to be insightful because change is a constant. That's just the reality. If anyone just thinks for a minute about how life has changed, let's say over the last 15 years. Okay, going back to 2001, that's easy, right? Think about 9/11, 2001. Think about the economy. Those are the macro level changes. Think about the political landscape, wars and whatnot. How different it is to fly on a plane today, for example. Not just with security, but with baggage restrictions, with the size of your seat, and all sorts of things. It's a different world in which we live, and change is just an inevitable reality that we have to be comfortable with. It's sort of like living in the moment, a certain sense of comfort, but not necessarily is everybody ready for that. And not necessarily is everybody prepared to embrace that. So we have to talk about what exactly change is all about, and how do we approach it in a way that is manageable and tolerable and ultimately sustainable. Because if you try to be a bull in a china shop, typically we know what will happen. So these are some things that we will lay out as we go through our conversation. Here are the two elements. So we're going to try to have a brief break in between these two. Number one, to understand the importance of it, especially for those of you who are agency leaders, the professionals in the room. I'm not saying that the lay leadership doesn't initiate change as well, but typically one would think that it's going to begin with your professional leadership and perhaps the board chair in particular. Okay? Why is this an important area? Why is it so critical? What do we find when people don't manage it right? And then, of course, to talk about concrete strategies that you can be implementing when you approach change or when you're considering it so that you have a successful launch in any initiative. And by the way, not necessarily is every change going to be the type that's transformative. Right? Change can be very subtle at times. It doesn't have to be something which, sort of roll out a major campaign or whatnot. We'll see how different ideas and different change elements can ultimately factor into your particular situation and environment. Okay? So at this point, you should be looking with me at page number 1, where it says Secrets to Leading Effective Sustained Change. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at this slide over here. Let's begin with a game. Is that okay? Yes. Okay, we're going to begin with a game. Now, the layout of the room is going to require a few different times a night for, I think, folks to maybe turn their chairs around to face this way, etc. So I hope that we can work with that without much difficulty. What I'm going to ask you to do is to divide into pairs. If you're sitting next to someone, that's totally fine. You can just sit right and talk to the person right next to you. In fact, in most cases, in all cases right now, We have even numbers at every table at the moment. Okay, so that'll work pretty well. If you have an odd number, you can just triple up. All right? You have a chart or a table on your sheet. When I tell you the term that we're going to be focusing on, I'm going to ask you to write 3 nouns, 3 verbs, and 3 adjectives that, in your mind, are associated with the term. Okay? Then, when we're done, you've got your 9 words on your paper, or whatever number it ultimately comes out to be. You'll then find a second partner. This may require getting up. May. I'm not promising, but it may. Depends on how talented and how dexterous you all are. We'll see. Okay? We're not going to be playing Twister, so you need not worry. But you'll find a second partner, you'll compare notes, and then I'm going to ask you from each category between the 2 of you to identify a keeper. So you'll discuss your 3 nouns with your partner's 3 nouns when you're done with round 1, and then you'll try to think of what's the one that you think really captures it the best. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We are tight, so we're not going to sit here and analyze it in great depth, but we're going to give us a little bit of an opportunity to feel. You'll never guess what the term is, by the way. Would you like to? Fantastic, you guys are good. Okay, here it is. So let's jump right into, again, the terms that we have on the paper, nouns, verbs, and adjectives associated with the word change. And we'll give you a few minutes to do that. Afterwards, we'll brainstorm together and I'll jot them down. Would anyone like to share a noun that you came up with to describe that talks about or connects with change? Yes,
I
sir.
want to share something else. It was interesting that you went from negative to positive.
Yeah.
When you started this whole Devar Torah business.
Yes.
So Pesach works that way too, from degradation to liberation. And it's interesting that in all this flow, the first stuff out was all negative ick.
You got it out of your systems.
And then we went to like matzah. And then we
Right.
went to
And then from there, it's clear sailing. Nice. Okay, once the matzah's passed. Got it. All right. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. I try to frame it any way I can. Nouns, anyone?
Values.
Sir?
People?
People. Okay. I thought I heard another one, maybe
Yeah.
values. Did I-
Values.
Yeah, values.
Okay. Oh, this is bright. All right. Not that it's a problem, I just don't know if you'll be able to see it. So let me choose people, values,
Teams.
okay, teams. You can keep them coming.
Donors.
Okay, one second, I heard 2 at the same time.
Process.
Process and
Donors.
donors. Okay. Curious about the donors piece, but that's certainly a noun for sure.
Agent.
Agent, okay. Vision. Interesting ideas. Vision,
Improvement.
okay. We'll do one more because I think I can only go down to 1 need this evening. And what's that last one for now? Anyone? All right, good enough. Excellent. Verbs.
Plan.
Plan. Okay, so the act of planning. Okay,
Innovate.
because it could be a noun as well. And what's that?
Innovate.
Innovate. Okay.
My friend said force.
Force.
I thought it was so cool.
Supporting.
The force is with you. What's that?
Supporting.
Support, collaborate.
Evaluate.
Okay. Seth, I think I'm done, by the way. This is everything. This is great. Okay, I heard evaluate, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Initiate.
Educate?
Initiate.
Initiate.
But
See,
educate.
I'm using my own biases here. Initiate.
Now we know what the right
Okay,
answer was.
educate. Yeah. Sorry, my handwriting gets sloppier as it goes lower on the paper. Anyone else?
Richard said evolve, which I
Evolve.
thought was very good.
Yes, it certainly did.
Yes, good job.
What's that? Any adjectives?
Dynamic.
Dynamic.
Progressive.
What's that?
Progressive.
Hopeful.
That was from me.
Interesting. I thought I heard progressive. Did I?
Yes.
Yes.
Progressive.
Refreshing.
Refreshing. Was there effective?
Effective.
Effective?
Yes.
Effective and,
Difficult.
what was the other one?
Oh, refreshing.
Refreshing. Okay, one second. Effective, refreshing, difficult. Okay. It's interesting how you could have both so close to one another, but really they're both very true. They're both very true. We don't want to be overly Pollyannish about things. Anyone else?
Upset.
Yes?
Upset.
Upset?
We had joyful.
I
Joyful.
had that too.
Okay, I got to join your change process. Okay, upset. It's interesting how they're like coming together in pairs almost. It's sort of like joyful, not so joyful. Right, I got it, interesting.
Sweet
Okay.
and sour, it's like Chinese food.
Yeah, it sort of comes together in an interesting way. Okay, ooh, this is really, I think I did this, it's probably my fault. It's coming apart, but that's all right, that's all right, we got it. We got it, we got it. They don't teach you this in graduate school. I just want to move it because I want to get this right. Just to the side, yeah. Yeah, okay, super. Okay, so improvement. I'm telling you, the hardest. You should take a picture of that. That's a great collection. That's a great. I should take a picture of that before I leave tonight. Okay. So, any actual, now that we've gotten past the one-word responses, any sentences that everyone wanted to share, just thoughts about the exercise that we did in terms of either framing your thought process or bringing out different experiences. Yes, ma'am.
So it sounds to me like people who have had negative experiences had more negative change words compared to people who've had positive experiences.
That could very well be. I mean, I don't know what people's experiences have been, but I think that you have, it's interesting if I make comments to your point a little bit further, it doesn't strike me as being contradictory to have sort of like this confluence of different emotions all happening at once. On the one hand, you got to go through the grind and deal with the difficulties associated with change. On the other hand, we know how positive the outcome could be. And sometimes in the process, we lose sight of one or the other. And that's why I think it's important for us to maintain balance, not to think for a moment that it's going to be easy, but also to keep in mind that if we do it the right way, and if we remain committed to a process, and if the process is conceived correctly from the outset, so that it takes into consideration the various landmines that may be out there as you go forward, then you stand a much greater chance of achieving success. But the statistics are not in our favor. In other words, when you look at realities, especially in corporate America, as we'll look at in a moment, you will see that change management is a difficult process, even for well-educated professionals. And for people who should all be motivated to move the bus in the same common direction. But whether it's about ego, or whether it's about misinformation, or lack of communication, or other variables, the things that you would think should move forward with relative ease oftentimes don't. And so I actually would like to direct you to that in a moment. This gentleman to the right on the screen is a man by the name of John Cotter, who's well known he's a Harvard professor, well known in the area of change management. And he's considered to be one of the foremost experts. And I'm going to actually direct you, let me see that it's here. I'm not sure I saw it before, so I want to make sure that it was printed. I think it is here. Let's see, yes, the third page. So everything is clipped together, so you can just remove that clip. Take a look at the third page. And I'm going to ask you, you can work here either independently or with somebody else sitting nearby. I'm going to ask you to read. It looks like this. It's a Word document, no images, just a few paragraphs that were from Why Transformation Efforts Fail. This is actually 20 years already that he penned this particular essay, but the dynamics, I think, are still very much at play. So take a look at what Cotter has to say, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to the 3 questions at the bottom of the paper. Okay?
Yes.
We'll take a few minutes of quiet time to do that. Again, you certainly can talk to other people around you. question number one, you can use an estimate if you want to use a number, or you can just use the descriptor. Once again, you should feel comfortable talking to the people next to you if you like. It doesn't have to be a private, silent exercise. When you're done, you can also take a look at the quote on the screen. I kind of wonder if Cotter and his people would have gotten this kind of outcome if he was talking to the corporate world. Anyone have a thought about question number one? What number did you think was appropriate for that?
Not high.
Okay.
most will be.
What's that?
40%.
I said 50/50.
You think it's that?
It just says what is.
Slightly tilting towards.
Yeah, I think, well, actually it says distinct tilts, right?
Yeah.
Distinct tilt. So I wonder if that's maybe like 35%, 40, somewhere in there. I'm just wondering, yeah. Okay, what about, I mean, the number's not so much the point, but I do think for most people encountering this for the first time, it's a bit surprising. You would think and typically would have a greater success. So let's talk about it. Number two, what do you think Cotter is saying? And by the way, you can add, I'm not sure that this really speaks to question two directly, but there's a kernel of something not found in this that maybe also adds to the problem that maybe you could distill. But what did you see in the paper? What was the main issue or issues? Yes, sir?
Steps are skipped.
Steps are skipped. Okay. Is there anything else that you noticed?
Moving too fast.
The speed of the process.
Speed.
Right? Our desire to get it done. We just want to be that bull in a china shop. You know, get moving. Right? A lot of us are motivated. We're inspired. Somebody comes and does a presentation. Maybe you're just looking at your hard realities and you say, we got to do something different around here, whatever it might be, and you're motivated to make change, and sometimes it can feel difficult to be patient in that process or to skip steps. The one thing that I was referencing, did anyone want to comment on this for a second? I was just focusing on the idea that with change, oftentimes there's history. And that actually, I think, was the benefit, one of the benefits of going through this exercise is because as one of the ladies, I can't recall which one of the ladies mentioned the idea of people tapping into past experience. That was somebody mentioned that. So I think that that's true when it comes to things associated with change. Most people don't change for the very first time when you ask them to change. Most of them have been part of organizations that have engaged in some type of change process before. As an educator, I can tell you, one of the things that will get teachers to roll their eyes the most is sitting them down at those back-to-school in-service workshops where they kind of feel like, been there, done that. You know, oh, every year for the last 27 years I've been teaching, we've always had some guy show up or some woman show up and give us a song and dance for a day, and no follow-up for the administration, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't need this. I'm just going to go back to do my own thing. And I'm sure every organization has its variation of that type of statement. So you might have this great idea, but maybe your predecessor also had a great idea that never really saw the light of day. Or maybe the previous board tried to initiate something that didn't actually succeed. So people in the back of their mind, I'll be right with you, sir, well, in the back of their mind may have some baggage, some doubting toms, if you will, associated with what you're trying to achieve. Yes?
There's a couple of words here that I think if you focus in on, sort of almost lead to the result.
Okay.
The first line says remake themselves, and the first line of the second paragraph, fundamental changes. So he's talking to some degree about forced changes as opposed to evolutionary changes.
And also larger scale.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's fair, that's fair.
And I think when you talk about remaking and making fundamental changes,
Right.
you are likely to fail more frequently than
Right.
you'll succeed. I think a lot of change is evolutionary. Leaders need to sort of catch up with what's happening
Yes.
and redirect the ship.
Sure.
But it doesn't have to be a fundamental change.
Agreed. Although, if I may extrapolate, I don't want to take away from number 3. Actually, I'm gonna bite my tongue. I'm not going to say any more for the moment. Let's go to number 3, because if it's not addressed, I can hopefully circle back to it. But what did you come up with for number 3, sir?
So I would say that the formula for change, no matter if it's in the corporate world or nonprofit, the formula for change is still going to be standard throughout.
Okay. And it's
Possibly a smaller scale.
possible on a smaller scale, yeah, and maybe with less, let's call it financial other implications at times, but yes, I would agree with you. The principles are universal principles, right? Which is why, for example, when we talk about topics of leadership or other things, whether a person who's speaking about it comes from a for-profit background, a not-for-profit background, etc., the idea of how do you inspire others to make a difference, how do you get them to be effective and enthusiastic, all these kinds of things, it doesn't matter necessarily where you're coming from if you understand humanity and if you understand relationships and if you understand that you're not just dragging along a group of people who are unwilling. If you do, you're not going to get very far. You need to find a way to make the change take root within your organization. Yes, sir.
Before you leave the Cotter quote,
Yes.
one of the things that we've been trying to teach our kids in the Hebrew school, and they're 13, is that failure is not a bad word. That all the lights are working here because Thomas Alva Edison failed a zillion times, and I think that the way Cotter's using a failure is almost like some sort of a bad word, and I think that that's counter to at least how we're teaching in the Hebrew school and for our kids.
Okay, that's a fair point. I think everything has two sides to it. The word failure in and of itself has a negative connotation. The only question is, what do you do with the failure? And unfortunately, for every Thomas Edison out there, there are probably 100 to more people who did not force their way through the line of resistance, did not get up again after they fell, right? They decided, I can't do it. I've made my attempt, it's just not me. Now that's a whole other workshop in the sense. You might be familiar with the research of a Stanford professor by the name of Carol Dweck. She talks about something called growth mindset. Right? The educators in the room are nodding their heads, they know what I'm talking about. But it's really a universal principle. And Angela Duckworth has given a widely watched TED Talk on the topic of grit. It's the same basic idea. Grit is not only the stuff you would measure your sandpaper with, but grit is really a matter of resiliency. It's a matter of fortitude. And when you talk about growth mindset in particular, what it basically says is, do I have the mental frame that allows me to say that I don't know it yet? I can't do it yet. But it doesn't mean I can't do it, period. And there's a fundamental difference between the two. If we get our children thinking with growth mindset, then ultimately we're really ahead of the game because now they can fight through. How many people, all the adults present in the room, I would think in some form or another had the same experience. How many of us went through grade school thinking, I am not good at, unless you were an A student across the board, maybe it was athletics, maybe it was arts, maybe it was something else, maybe it was social. I'm not social, or I'm not good at reading, and we never really challenged our own self-perception. So while technically failure is a negative term, those that fight through it ultimately achieve success, and in many cases achieve a better outcome that had they not experienced any type of failure from the beginning. So that's a very valid point. Yes?
I think it's much harder. I think the answer, how do these corporate experiences apply to nonprofit change initiatives? I think nonprofits are much more difficult
Go ahead.
than for-profits in two very distinct reasons. One
Yes.
is the purpose or the goal or the mission of a nonprofit is much more holistic, much more varied. And if you actually went around this room and asked all the 30 people here what the mission is probably of their nonprofit, you can get similar answers.
Okay.
In the for-profit area, the answer is usually to make money.
Yep.
The other
That's fair.
big difference that I see is in a nonprofit, we're volunteers. If you don't like the change, you walk out the door. If you're working for a company, they don't. And I hate to give any credibility to the person I'm about to quote, but this is one of the things that Donald Trump said the other day, which is it's harder to run a country than it is a company. And the reason is he's discovered that everyone doesn't think like him here. In his company, he could just fire whoever didn't.
That's right.
And here, running
He's
a
doing
country,
it in the government.
he's trying,
He's in the government
but
too, yeah.
it is a big difference in a nonprofit and a profit.
Right, I think those are very valid points. Yes, ma'am?
I'm gonna take a slightly different angle on that. A lot of times, when you have a significant change in a nonprofit organization, it's also driven by money. It's different than a corporation who's trying to make lots of money, but you're trying to make ends meet, expand your programs, do all kinds of things. So money is always a driving factor for major change. You know, another thing that happens is you have leadership that, you know, the founders no longer going to be the leader. So that could be another reason. But a lot of times, money is a major issue.
Well said. I'm going to take one more hint for now because I'm also looking at the clock and I want to make sure that we're able to move ahead. I know you had your hand up before.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
I just want to go back to failure.
Yes.
And years ago, I read a really great analogy. If you were dying of thirst and you had a well in front of you, and every time you cranked the well, you came up with an empty bucket.
Yep.
And let's say the next time I'm going to decide it's the last time I'm going to do it, and if no water comes up, I give up. But what happens if the water is in that bucket after the last bucket? So, you know, it speaks to failure. Sometimes you have to fail a lot to be successful.
Yeah.
And I find that people who are successful in life kind of have that attitude.
So let's stay on the topic of failure. By the way, Zig Ziglar, who's one of the well-known leadership voices of the last decades or so, has a talk about priming the pump. And he has he actually would bring the pump to his seminars and he would demonstrate the process.
It's a great
Harkening back to his youth as well, down in Mississippi, Alabama, I forget which one, where they were very much dependent on the pump. And it's just a matter of keep priming it until you eventually get the water to flow. So why do, in fact, we deal with failure? So there are a number of different reasons. Now, again, I don't want to suggest that we can't have great change efforts, but based on statistics, based on research, we have to be cognizant of the fact that change can often be rife with difficulty. Where does that difficulty often lie? One of them has to do with how much support we do or do not receive. Now, some of that, as we'll talk about, is controllable to a degree, right? You may not get support initially, but what can you do in order to engender that support? Misunderstanding, right? Not necessarily getting everybody on the same page or on what a good outcome looks like. That's really a critical piece, as we'll discuss. What is the vision? And what does an excellent outcome really look like? When we succeed, what will it be? Right? Too often we have this idea, we're going to change, we're going to enhance our capital campaign, we're going to change engagement levels, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But how do we concretize it in a way, with numbers perhaps, or other quantifiers, that are going to allow us to say, this is what it looks like. So even before we're there, everybody knows what that goal is. Have we done our homework in that regard? Okay? Also, the misunderstanding about what the processes are that are involved. Does this have a red laser capacity on the side? Oh, in the center. Oh, this button here. Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. I got it. All right? And then the last one, which is something that we talked about before, we'll go through these in detail, is impatience. right? Do people really appreciate that some change just takes time? It takes time in terms of changing habits. It also it takes time in terms of putting the pieces in place in order to make things happen. So my question to you is, and I'm going to sort of ask it without eliciting a response, again, looking just at the time to allow us to move forward. When you think about leadership, when you think about individuals who get you to want to change, what is it that they do? Okay? And we have to remember that there's a human element in all of this. I'm going to show you a chart in just a second, which is fascinating. But it reminds me of a story of an elderly Jew in Jerusalem in the beginning of the 20th century, a man by the name of Rabbi Aryeh Levin, who was known as the tzaddik of Jerusalem, the righteous man of Jerusalem. And he helped people from all walks of life, all levels of observance, people who were incarcerated, you name it, he was there for them. And he was, obviously, as an observant Jew, interested in the keeping of the Shabbat. And so there was a Jewish, an Orthodox community, all the stores would close for the Shabbat, and there was one store owner that would not. And it bothered everybody tremendously. And so Rabbi Aryeh went in, he felt like, how could I go ahead and give this person a lecture? You know what, I'll just go into the store and observe. So he goes into the man's store, all dressed for Shabbat, with the special Jerusalem type of attire. I don't know if you've ever seen it, sort of like the beige coat and like the Hasidic look and whatnot. And he walks in the store, it's very busy, it's Erev Shabbos or Shabbat, just before sundown. And he takes a chair and he sits in the back of the store. The man who owns the store notices him, but doesn't really want to say anything. Eventually he sees the rabbi's not going anywhere. He said, Rabbi, can I help you? No, it's fine, I'm just sitting, I hope it's okay. No problem. Sits for a little bit longer, it's getting late, it's already sundown. He's still sitting there with the chair. The rabbi's like, you know, the guy doesn't know what to do, etc. And Rabbi Levin eventually gets up to walk out and he says to the man, you should know that I was asked to speak to you about the Shabbat. I was asked to speak to you to tell you how important it is. But how could I possibly do that without getting a sense of what you're dealing with? And you have a lot of business on Friday afternoon and sundown. There's a lot of reasons to keep your store open. But Shabbat is Shabbat. And with that he walks out. And with that he walks out. And the story continues that the following week the man either closed his store a little bit earlier, whatever it was. Eventually, he stopped completely. Because somebody took the time to understand his situation, didn't pass judgment, told him his perspective, and then he moved on. And I thought that that's sort of like a nice way to tie into this, which I got from John Maxwell, who we're going to quote in a moment. Also one of the leadership names out there. Take a look closely and tell me if there's anything here that really catches your attention. Can you see it in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. This one, these say don't buy in. These say buy in. Okay. And this one says get another leader, get another leader, get another vision, get behind the leader. Take a moment to look and tell me if there's anything that jumps out at you. Of the 4 lines going across. Rows. Anyone?
Yeah, where the leader buys in and the vision is bought into, you have the positive result.
So let me clarify if I may. It's not the leader buying in, it's buying into the leader.
Oh, all right, well, either way.
Right. Well,
I mean, if the leader buys into the philosophy of the group, or I mean, that's how I was reading it, but I understand what you're saying.
No, there's power in what you're saying. That's great. Yeah, the one I was thinking of is this one here. And the reason I say that is because you could have the right vision. You could have the right idea. But if you don't sell it right, I'm using it a little more broadly than this is used. I think this is more focused on just making sure that the leader is the kind of person that people could rally behind. But that is a reason. It's a reason. Right? And leadership, of course, is professional, but it's also lay. And so sometimes you've had these people before, I'm sure. People whose asks are very appropriate, who want the right thing for you, but because of your relationship with them is somehow, toxic or whatever it might be, it just doesn't move forward. Not because the ask is wrong, just because the relationship prevents it from moving forward. So I think one of the things we have to think about when we talk about change management is, are we as leaders creating the environment necessary to help those that we want to lead, not just see the benefit of the vision, but to allow them to see the benefit because of the relationship that you've created with them. Okay? So it's an important piece I wanted to put out there before we got any further, because I think that that's a critical element. All these other things are great, but if there's a relational block, if you just can't see beyond the leader and the ask of the leader, and I will tell you, I experienced that myself. I know for sure, people may not have been willing to tell me, but I know for sure that there were people, in this, in my case primarily teachers, but not exclusively, whose feathers I may have ruffled in one way or another. And so when we got to other issues, I felt that there was a sort of like an artificial resistance that had nothing to do with the issue at hand, but just had to do with the relationship that I had created with them prior to that. And so that's why I think it's important for us to be mindful of it as we talk about it. And here's the quote of John Maxwell, which you have on your paper. Okay? And this line in the beginning is critical. You really cannot separate the leader from the cause. They always go together. Because people see a cause as being driven by a person or a group of people. And so if the group of people is establishing, by the way, this need not only be a conversation about you and your board, let's call it, but this is also really a conversation about how your agency, how your organization interacts with the broader community. Because in many cases, you're making asks of the community, financial asks or other asks. And they may require real change, not just open up your pocketbook, but something more profound and pronounced. Have you established the equity? Have you built the relationship? Now this doesn't mean that you can't ever move forward with change, because you always have to work on the relationship, but it does mean that the two of them go hand in hand. And that point is ultimately very important. Okay? So, I'd like to go a little bit further, and then I'm going to schedule just a short break for us to get up and do whatever it is that we need to do. But of course, if you need to step out for whatever the reason, please don't hesitate to do so. So part of it has to do with building equity, right? A lot of listening. Being a good listener is critical. In fact, I would think of change management as sort of like a jetway or a runway with an airplane ultimately taking off. There needs to be a lot of runway for an effective takeoff. And that runway's got to have a lot of the listening. Part of it to get ideas, but part of it just to open up the lines of communication. Getting people to think they value what I have to say. And especially in a smaller community. I know Atlanta is bigger than your community, but in many ways it felt kind of small, because my particular school community was relatively small logistically. They weren't that far spread out. They were centralized with a couple of synagogues. And so everybody shopped in the same places and prayed in the same places and this kind of thing. So a very small community type of feel. And if you weren't providing that type of listening ear and that type of communication, people felt alienated. They felt like they weren't in some way included in that process. Okay? Where you can, create some small wins. Sometimes they can build momentum, right? If you can demonstrate, when I say you, I mean the leaders in the room, I mean the organizations and agencies of the room. When you can do some change efforts that don't necessarily require any major change in lifestyle or thinking or things like that, and you can demonstrate that you have the ability to make some gains, to help people with their working conditions, with their general communal relationships or whatnot, but don't require people to do all that much. And you're kind of like doing that for them, you're going to start to put some wind behind your sails. I like to think of it in the examples that I had where we, even some small cosmetic things around the school, improving the conditions of the building and the parking lot, changing the way payroll was done so that it was more automated and people felt like they were being taken care of. Small wins, little things like that. And then when you ask them for something bigger, you have a little bit behind you to get them, to push forward. And of course, this is a hard thing to do. Typically speaking, credit will find you anyway. But if you think in the terms of servant leadership, you might be familiar with the term. Servant leadership means I, as the leader, am there to serve my agency, my community. So you don't take the credit for it. The credit will find you. The credit will ultimately find you, but the main thing is people should feel like you're not in it for that. And then when we come back from our break, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about how do we build trust. Because I think that trust is a key underlying piece as well. Relationships is one, but relationships require trust as well. So when we return, I'm going to share with you a grid, a matrix from Ken Blanchard, another name in the leadership space that you might be familiar with. And Blanchard talks about the ABCD model. We've talked so far about realities of change, different factors that happen along the way. And one of the ways that I think we can, as leaders, whether we're paid or not paid, it doesn't matter, as leaders in our community, one of the key ways by which to help change move forward effectively is by developing trust. Now, are you in the back of the room able to see the smaller print?
Yes.
Is that it? Are those, you're able to see all of this? Yes. So what I'm going to ask you to do, these are called, by the way, the ABCDs of trust.
Yes.
It's the research of Ken Blanchard and some of his associates. Cynthia Alstead, I believe, is one of them. Also can be found in the book that's coming out that I prepared. But either way, I'm going to ask you to rank these 4 qualities in terms of which one you think has the greatest impact on trust between leader and the rank and file, so to speak. Is it able, defined as their basic competence? Is it believable, the idea that they act with integrity? Is it care and connection? Or is it dependability and reliability? I'm going to ask you to rank them from 1 to 4. I don't really care. We could say that 1 is most integral for trust, okay, or most critical. So take a moment to do that. Just curious about your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. I will also mention, as you're thinking about this, that on his website, he might have more than one, but on his website, Ken Blanchard also offers a trust assessment. And I've actually downloaded it, so if you're interested, Seth, I can more than happily pass it along to you. And you can't, it's not a self-assessment, although in theory you could self-assess, but it's really something that you would give to those in your inner circle for feedback. How trustworthy are you? Has anyone here participated in a 360 feedback survey or something similar? Okay. So I actually did that as well in my Chicago days, and I found, interestingly enough, areas where I thought I did a good job in some of these. In fact, people didn't see me as doing such a good job compared to what I thought for myself. And one of them, I considered myself in particular to be a good communicator. That I thought I wrote nice, clear memos and talked to people, and it was a small school, so I didn't think it was that big a deal to keep the communication loop nice and tight. And yet, some of the feedback indicated that maybe I wasn't doing as good of a job as I thought I did or should have, etc. So I'm just curious to know, based off of this, how many of you chose able as the most important element of trust? Your actual ability. Okay, how many chose believable? How many chose, I'm trying to keep the numbers in my head. How many chose connected? And how many chose dependable? Interesting. So the last 3 roughly came out to be about the same. The first one I think got 0 responses. Now isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Because if you interview somebody to be your head of school, head of agency, head of organization, whatever it might be, aren't you usually looking for ability first and foremost? In most cases, right? Of course we ask the questions, how is there relationships and stuff like that, but we don't necessarily prioritize those areas. But in reality, ability takes, now to me that's actually consistent with what we looked at before. Right. I think that's pretty consistent with what we said over here with Maxwell. The idea, oh, I went too far, somehow that slide didn't show up when I went backwards, but here it is. The idea that people don't necessarily buy into the vision, the ability may not be great, but the other stuff is pretty strong, get another vision. Meaning to say, we'll continue to support you until you get it right. But if you have the ability, we buy into the concept, but we don't connect with you as a leader, then get another leader. Now, I don't want to keep making this about the professionals in the room. That's not what I'm saying. Everybody here is a leader. You're all leaders in whatever you do, both personally, professionally, as well as communally. So you're all in the same boat in this regard. But isn't it interesting that we're less interested in the ability of the individual as we are in their ability to connect with us, to be believable and dependable and really connected. So I just thought that that's something for us to consider.
So I think it parallels even in the business world. You're hiring the person. The skills can be learned, but you want the quality person first. And then
you're seeing companies making that decision more and more. They're emphasizing. I remember seeing a video with Steve Jobs when he was younger. You know, the olden days of Apple Computer, whatever it was called back then, Macintosh. I forget exactly what the evolution of the company was, but he talked about how they would invite people and spend a whole day with them and really try to get to know them. And then, you know, I think their technical skills were secondary. And that was, I think, cutting edge thinking at the time. I don't think corporate America was quite there then, in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. But eventually, I think more and more, especially with many more companies being founded by millennials, the younger, the Gen Y or Gen Z even, people who are, you know, younger and have a tendency to think more about the relationship and how and the culture and ultimately how does it make me feel more so than what is the profit that it's going to line in my bank account. Though I did see other research also that I happen to include in the book about two groups. I can't recall where exactly these groups were found, but one group chose the profession. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was now. One group chose the profession based off of what was typically, I guess, considered to be more in line with making profit, and others just chose what they were passionate about and sort of saw the profit as the back end. And of the group, of the millionaires, however many there were in the group, a very high percentage, 90+% of the group, were the millionaires who had chosen passion prior to what they thought was just the easy or direct way to profit. So it's just something to think about, that when you really love what you do, and that comes through in your job, that ultimately drives people forward.
Where would passion fall in one of those qualities?
I don't know if passion is a trust element per se, maybe that's why it's not here, but I think that passion may be about connection.
Sure.
Probably, that was, to me, that's the most logical place to put it. But yeah, I think passion is critical too. Okay, so I wanted you to see that. Now I think we're officially aligned with where we are the second part of our presentation. Okay, good. Now, so with that in mind, so these are just some ideas, good practices. By the way, for those of you who did not notice, another page was left for you during the break. This was part of the original handout but didn't make it into your packet. So you can sort of neatly slip it in under, it really is like the back of this page. Right? In other words, your first page is two-sided. This page is only one-sided, the one that has the circle on it. That's, I guess you call it page 3, remember? No, it should have been. Okay, and this one, which was found on your paper, which was found on your desk, is page 4. Okay? Sort of just keeping that in mind. All right? So we're in the bottom of side 1, so you can see I'm now shifting into the mode which teachers typically do in a 40-minute period when they hit like minute 37. And they know they've got like 20 minutes worth of content and 3 minutes yet to teach it. So I'm going to pick up a little bit on pace. I'm not going to try to speed through everything. And if ultimately we leave a couple of things to the side, so be it. We didn't start with the usual amount of time that I typically have. So we're going to do the best we can. But I don't want to sacrifice quality just to say that we covered, so to speak, the entire breadth of what I included in your packet. So, and Steve Jobs, I mentioned him just a moment ago. There are others as well. You might be familiar with a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. Thank you. You're familiar with it. Okay? Read it if you haven't already. The character who becomes the new leader, Catherine, I think is her name, she spends time observing before she does anything. Bill Gates was, not Bill Gates, Steve Jobs is the same way in round 2 when he returned to Apple. Spent time observing before he came to everybody and said, this is what we're going to do. It's critical to observe, to understand really what's going on. Ask lots of questions. Understand what people are thinking. Why are we doing what we're doing? But obviously not in a way that's confrontational. There are ways you could ask questions. You could sound like a nudnik, if I could use the Yiddish, if it is Yiddish. I think it is. And you can also ask questions in a way that can sound accusatory. And so that's really important. I'm really bad at that. Oftentimes my questions, in coaching, I've gotten so much better. What do you think about? Or, would you consider? Things like that that are a little bit less sort of pointed in the questioning. But the key thing is to try to understand. As Stephen Covey would often say, seek to understand before being understood. And that's it's one of the 7 habits that he lists in his very famous book. Okay? Of blessed memory. Identify opportunities. Once you've collected some information, now you can start to think about where do we have opportunity to grow. And sometimes you would just want to use the initial changes we talked about before to build some small wins, gain some momentum, and also to feel out the process in a low temperature environment. Right? Because we know that when major change is required, the temperature rises invariably. Sometimes you have no choice. You come into a situation, the books are all messed up, the finances are really in trouble, other problems exist. It's what we call a turnaround situation. You don't have a choice. Right? But in most cases, if you have that runway, give yourself the benefit of going slowly, identifying opportunities, and also to try to analyze who your players are. And try to spend some time with them to figure out what they're thinking and how squarely behind your initiatives are they. So you have that on your packet. That's now on side 2. Okay? And you also have to realize, your stakeholders, they carry different levels of weight. There are some people whose influence is greater and people whose influence is less significant. You've got people whose interest is less, people whose interest is more. Okay? So invariably, the people who are here are the most important ones, the key players. They're the people who you really need to ensure get behind you as much as you possibly can to gain their support and their trust. Okay? There are people who are influential but not so interested. Just make sure at least you want to try to increase their levels of interest. You want to push them over here if you can. That would be your ideal. So you're thinking about the change, you're also thinking about the players and the individuals. And it may look something like this. Okay? So these might be some of your key stakeholders over here. This might be what we want to be the minimum commitment required. We call it 0. And X would be where they are right now. Okay? So this individual over here is totally fine, this one as well. And you'll notice that you've got different I'm doing this obviously quickly, but I want to just give you a feel. Opposed means they're in opposition to your endeavor. This is more of a passive position. Helping it happen, they're going to facilitate, and these are the real, the real drivers, the ones who are going to make it happen. Okay? So you might only need 1 or 2 people to be in this area over here. You might need more. I'm just using this as a sample. Ideally, you want everybody at least to be over here. Okay? However, in some instances, you may have to push some people along to get them to where they need to be. And that's going to be conversation that you're going to have. That's going to be showing them the benefits. And of course, helping them to see it from their perspective as much as you can. Really, as far as I'm concerned, just my experience and my study, and you can verify if you agree with this or not, so much of leading effective change is not the actual change, but it's in sowing the seeds of change. It's in establishing and building the foundation of change. Because once you've got everybody behind you, you've got that momentum, the change will almost happen automatically if, of course, you know where you want to go, because you've got so many people behind you pushing it along to success. It's where you've got people who are in opposition mode, who are undermining you at every turn. That's where, more often than not, or they just never felt that you took the time to bring them in. They never felt that you took the time to explain why this was important, or how this was going to happen, or what the impact was going to be to me in particular. I want to know about me, right? Me, the rank and file. I want to know how this is going to impact me. And if I haven't taken the time to make that clear, ultimately, I think people, even if they see the benefit, are going to, on some level, be resistant, even if the resistance is just being over here. Right? You do it, go right ahead, I'm going to let it happen, I'm not going to oppose it, because I don't think that's good for me to oppose it. It's politically not correct, it might get me into trouble, but I'm not necessarily going to get behind it. And the more you can get people behind it to push it forward, usually the more successful we'll be. Yes, ma'am?
So if you have a situation where misconceptions may have occurred, how do you, and someone remains opposed, how do you get them to at least go toward the other side?
Yeah. So again, I think a personal conversation could be very helpful. Take them out to, over a cup of coffee.
If they don't, but if they're not admitting it to you, you're hearing from other people saying.
Well, I think you could still say to them, there's rumors circulating that you're not really with us, and I just want to take the time, if I can, to clarify what your position is and to explain, where we're going with it as best as possible. I mean, I will tell you, sometimes you build such a positive momentum that others will do it for you. I remember very distinctly, we had, I might have mentioned this in my last presentation, I can't recall. There's a program called PBIS, which is a national program that relates to student comportment, positive behaviors, instruments, and supports, and you'll find it basically in every state in the union. And it's a great system that I found it to be a great system because it's values-based. And what it basically says is these are the values of our institution, and these are the applications of such values in different contexts. So for example, you embrace the value of respect. So what does respect look like in a classroom? What does it look like on the school bus? What does it look like in the lunchroom? What does it look like in non-structured environments at the park, etc., etc.? And therefore, once you have embraced those values, we actually made a Jewish connection. We called it the Sefer program to tie into the idea of Sefer Torah, of a Torah scroll. And SFRR was the acronym. It had no verbs, it had no vowels, but it had those 4 consonants: safe, friendly, respectful, and responsible. Those were our 4. And it's spelled Sefer, so we had a little cartoonish character of a Sefer Torah, teaching the values. It was very cute. But it really captured the essence once you had everybody on board. So I had one teacher, actually a Judaic studies teacher, that just didn't see the importance of this. And he was sort of a belligerent fellow. And, would pipe up when you really didn't want him to. Does anyone have that experience? At a board meeting or something? Sort of like a little on the ornery side, not really as socially astute as you'd like for him to be, this kind of thing. And he pipes up and he says, I don't know what. Now, and I will tell you, the first meeting that we had about this took place around Purim time in March. We're now in the following year, 2nd or 3rd faculty meeting. So it's like October, all right? And he's still piping up with the opposition. So a female colleague, one of the other teachers, who typically was a very non-participant, participatory type individual, participative, if that's even a word, in our meetings, she turns to him and she goes, Rabbi, we already discussed it. We already agreed to it. Let's move on. And so I had a moment there where I was like, oh, thank you. I was in my Baruch Hashem moment, exactly. Thank God. Because I was going to be another one of those moments where I'm going to have to deal with ornery fellow over here and take equity out of my account and all this kind of stuff and deal with it. It's never comfortable. Even if you do it well, it's never comfortable. And then when she handled it for me, I'm like, dude, this is cool. I'm moving on, right? And we did, and that was what it was. Okay? So, now that you've got everybody behind you, let's talk practically. Okay? Where you can, obviously, you can't take on the whole change element by yourself. You're going to need to be able to delegate. We'll talk more about delegation in just a moment. Okay? And how you do it. I actually do a whole different seminar on delegation because it's really a process. Right? Oftentimes we think, what's the big deal? I'll just punt it off to somebody. But how often do we see professionals that have desks with stacks of paper yay high because they're not able, willing, whatever, to delegate? It's not so simple all the time. And we've all experienced it, so we don't want to look at any direction in our room here. I'm as guilty as anyone else. Go look at my desk at home, you'll see it. Okay? The only thing is, when you work for yourself, you really don't have anyone to delegate to, except for your left hand. All right, different conversation. All right? And the other piece of it, of course, is to communicate. Because when you're communicating effectively, consistently, people know what's going on. They know what's happening, when it's going to happen, what's my role in all of this. We don't like surprises, right? Contrary to what they tell you about birthday parties, people don't like surprises, all right? And when they don't know, as we'll see a little bit later, they fill in the void. And when they fill in the void, it's usually not with the same rose-eyed optimism that many of us had earlier. It's with dread. It's with fear. It's with what's really coming. And we've all experienced that. We know what that feels like. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
I just wanted to say sometimes also with delegation, one of the benefits of that is giving, when you give people authority, it gives them ownership, which gives them buy-in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So delegating authority is a great thing.
Right. Actually, it's part of our tradition as well. The Hebrew word ahava, which means love, is connected to the word hav, which means to give. We often think that love is sort of like this instantaneous thing, like Hollywood, presents it. It's like this magical thing, potion stuff that happens across a room, or we say we love steak, or we love pizza, or things like that. But the reality is, if we loved it, you wouldn't eat it, right? So true love is something much deeper. But the reason that you love something and become committed to it is because you've given to it. And when you give somebody the opportunity to give, to invest themselves in a process. I'm actually listening to it, like I'm listening in my car. It's called Audible. You might be familiar with Amazon. So it's like books on tape. And I'm listening to Jeff Walker, who happens to be a marketing guru. And he talks about that when you do your launches for products and all sorts of things, give people, before you launch, an opportunity to comment, an opportunity to make suggestions, an opportunity to be part of your process. The more people feel part of your process, to your point, the more they ultimately will feel that they are invested and that it's going to be successful. Because when I make a choice, research is very clear on this, when I make a choice about something, we're going to defend that choice much longer. So for example, if you make a choice about which synagogue to pray in, or which school to send your children to, or which baseball team to follow, right? Or anything like this, and then things don't go the way you initially envisioned, you're going to stay with it much longer than if you were looking at it for the first time. Brian Tracy has this idea of, I think he calls it QUINK, knowing what I now know, which, by the way, is a very powerful idea, because whenever you're in a situation of problems, right, oftentimes, somebody mentioned it before, I think one of the gentlemen here talked about the human side. I think you talked about this, of organization, non-for-profits. I thought you were going to go in a little bit of a different direction. The idea of, in a non-for-profit, we're typically we're more humane in many ways than in a for-profit. A for-profit, to the point that was mentioned before, ultimately it's about the bottom line. It really is. In a non-for-profit, we tend to, and you see that with schools, why don't they just fire that teacher? Why don't they just get rid of that person in a non-for-profit? The answer is because it has a different culture. And that's not a bad thing necessarily at all. But at the same time, we have to be able to say to ourselves, knowing what I know now, if I had to make the decision again, what would my decision be? And sometimes we have to be able to cut the line and say, you know what? We did it in good faith. It was the right kind of thing at the time, but ultimately it didn't pan out. We have to move on. And that's also part of change. So there's a lot of play here, and that's why it gets a little complicated, because we have careers at stake, but a lot of things oftentimes at play, and we have to be mindful of that. So here's something for you to look at when it comes to delegation. I could spend an hour on this slide, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to do so. Just take a look for a moment, and you have, I think Wendy has all the slides. I think I sent them to you as slides, so they can be made available later. You'll notice over here, if you've ever read Ken Blanchard's 1 Minute Manager, you'll know what this is intuitively. If you haven't, get your hands on it, because there's a lot for all of us. And it's not big, it's not thick, it's not a large book, it's easy read, and it's narrative based. So it reads like a dialogue, like a story. So it's really an easy pickup for anybody. Anyway, you'll notice delegation is only in quadrant 4. Delegation is only in quadrant 4. High competence, you'll notice the colors correspond. So green here corresponds to green here. High competence and high commitment, that's where you delegate. Because that time, low direction and low support is required. So true delegation is where you're giving it over to somebody because they have the tools and the energy and the attitude and all of the factors necessary to get the job done basically without you. That's what real delegation is. Anything less than that is on the directing, coaching, supporting continuum. And there you're dealing with people, the way that they describe it is that they're very motivated at the beginning, so you don't need to support them that much, but they need a lot of direction. Over time, their motivation falls by the wayside, and now you've got the worst of both. The motivation has dropped, and they still haven't built the aptitude and the efficacy and the skill. So they're over here, they need some coaching. They need high direction, but they also need a lot of support. As you move forward, the level of direction diminishes because they've gotten better at it, but you still need to support them. And then finally you get to the level where they're so competent that they're providing their own juice. They're supporting themselves because they have that initiative and they have that desire. So really, your ideal delegation candidate is an S4. Anyone less than S4 is going to need more of your time and more of your support. But at the end of the day, and again, this is really a bigger conversation, if you invest in those people on the front end, and you spend a lot of time with them, eventually it'll pay itself back many times over in the amount that they're able to accomplish for you and for your organization. So, as we circle back to this slide for a moment, when you advance the agenda, where you can, find other people to help you. Make sure that you're communicating effectively. And then as we talk about implementation, I'm just going to put, actually I can't put them all up at once, so I'll just go them one by one. But now, just to get caught up to where we are on the paper, we should now find ourselves on side 3. Okay? And you'll see number 8. This slide corresponds with number 8. Okay? So I hope I haven't lost you at any point. If I have, you can certainly let me know. Where you can, you want to proceed slowly. As we talked about, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And in most cases, as Cotter discussed, the critical elements are that you are giving it enough time and you're providing enough support along the way. And you're communicating effectively all the way through. Keeping in mind that even if it's intuitive and obvious and easy for you, for many of your people it's not. And so as the person leading the process, whoever the leaders are in the room, you want to just be mindful of the fact that many others are coming along with you for the ride, and you need to make sure that you're bringing them with you. Otherwise, you'll be like me in an airport where you're sort of like darting off the plane and you leave your family all the way behind, schlepping their luggage, have to turn around 26 times. Where is everybody, right? So you don't want to be that guy, if you know what I mean. Okay? And if anyone else is like that, we can have a support group conversation afterwards, if you'd like. But anyway, right? You want to give people opportunities to learn. Educating them is critical. Build their efficacy. Give them knowledge. And that could be through workshops. That could be through webinars. That could be through books. It could be through team meetings and conversation. But people need to be able to learn. If you don't give them the tools, how can you expect them to do it? And how can you expect them to be motivated to do it? So that's a critical element as well. Any change that requires learning, that has to be factored in monetarily, budgetarily. It has to be factored in terms of your time. It has to be factored in terms of your players. Who are they that you're going to seek to educate to ensure that they can handle this element for you? Okay? Check in regularly with all parties. How are we doing? Surveys could be useful here. I don't know what your survey response rate is, but you could have informal dialogue, right? Don't just do a beginning and an end. But schedule regularly that you're going to check in with your people that are affected by the changes that you're discussing and get some feedback from them. And based on the feedback that you get, you then can go ahead and assess your progress. You could reinforce the good things that are happening. Sorry, I think there's one that I wanted to see there, which is to make adjustments as needed, right? Sometimes you're going to have plan A for your change, but then along the way, you're going to realize that you can't sustain plan A all the way through. Something has to change. And if you go into it with a clear picture that's going to guide you, but enough inner flexibility and confidence that you're doing the right thing, you'll be able and willing to adjust on the fly. Right? Because sometimes your best laid plans at the beginning are really not the best plans. You thought they were the best plans when you started, but once you got started, you saw the realities on the ground. You've all been, everybody here has been part of a change, and it doesn't have to be a big change process. Even little things around your house, etc. You plan X ultimately is not the greatest idea, and you shift to Y. But you're doing that because of the feedback that you're getting. So where there's progress, you want to reinforce it, and when there's not, you want to decide how to handle that. You bring the process back, whatever it might ultimately be. But the more that you've given your people a chance to work through it with you, give you feedback, learn along the way, take ownership and responsibility, all of those things are going to be helpful. And I think the next slide really captures the cycle very nicely. So I know in the back it may be a little bit hard to see. I'll read it to you starting at 12 o'clock. Visioning and detailed planning, I think this is really where it begins. Strong support, we talked about this idea, building support with your stakeholders. Continuous and varied communication, making sure that you're constantly bringing the message along. And I would make the communication not just, here's what we're doing, but make it the kind of communication that excites people. The kind of communication that gets people optimistic and thinking, this is really happening. We're really making progress. Look at what's, bring in a testimonial, bring in a little case study snippet, something along the lines of, we're measuring progress, we're actually getting places. And to get people more and more excited as you move forward with it. Assessment to gauge your successful milestones, and of course, wherever you have challenges. Trainings and other activities that are going to help people become more educated. Reinforcement, and this is very important. This is important with any type of change, any type of learning for that matter. You can't do a one and done. It never works, right? And I'll say it about this workshop as well. Any workshop, any training, any speech, anything. If all you do is listen to somebody, hopefully someone entertaining for a period of time, and they share good information with you, and then you put it neatly on a shelf and never go back to it, it's not going to be very valuable to you. But if, for example, you take a few minutes at your next board meeting, whether that's a federation meeting or whether that's an individual agencies, and you take a little bit of time to talk about recent learning, whether it's about tonight's learning or other learning, discussing it, giving people opportunities to apply it in your specific culture and environment and with your own specific situation that you're grappling with. Last time we talked about this, what would be some relevant applications? Of course, you want to think about the leadership, whoever's organizing the meeting, whoever's setting the agenda for the meeting, is going to want to think about that strategically beforehand. But nonetheless, when you bring everybody together, you now give them an opportunity to take it, deepen it, and apply it. And that's really critical. Take it from me, I'm an educator. That one thing I can tell you, not much else, but learning doesn't happen unless it's applied. And the best way to learn it is to teach it. The best way to learn it, research is very clear on this. The more active you are in the learning, the more you do to reinforce it and then actually to teach it to somebody else. Have a brief conversation with somebody about it. Even if you set up a phone conversation with somebody sitting next to you, and tomorrow you pick up the phone for 5 minutes, what did you think were the three most important things you learned last night? And you did that with somebody else, you're going to take away much more than if you just sat here and participated, even though you're doing a great job. But even so, it's different when you own it on your own. And you do it a little bit afterwards, after your brain has had a process to think about it and process. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm only letting you get away with it because you're adults. Otherwise, if it was my classroom, I'd check for understanding. But I know you're good. So we're moving on. Okay? Now, I'm going to skip this. Let's go right here. I think this is this will be our last area of focus. We only have a few minutes at this point. I do want to leave a little bit of time remaining for wrap-up and questions and all. But I wanted to introduce you to this formula because you'll see here different elements that are really important. And you'll notice I never verified that this is a true multiplication sign, meaning to say that they multiply one to the other, but I'm going to assume that it is. You have to have these three factors working together to overcome this one factor. Okay? So dissatisfaction, we'll talk about that in a minute, what that means exactly. Taking advantage of the current level of dissatisfaction, which is always the driver for change. Unless it's just, let's call it market realities or things like that, that also drive change. But usually it's some level of dissatisfaction with where we are. It's compounded by the vision that you create of what you want to become. It's then enhanced by the first steps that you take to build momentum. All of that has to be stronger than resistance. And at this point, we should find ourselves on the page that was handed to you at the break. Okay, this last one over here, sorry, this one over here. Okay, you'll see it at the top there. Let's go through them one by one. So dissatisfaction with the status quo. What you have over here, if time would permit, I'd love to do it with you, but you have it in front of you, and you can do it really at any time, maybe at a board meeting if you wanted to. Right over here, in the middle of the page. This is something that I picked up from a consultant online. I think her name is Deborah Macklin. I always like to quote people where I can. And I saw it on one of her posts. I thought it was brilliant. It's called Making a Case for Change. And the case for change, you're basically saying, right, what is it that we want? Why do we want it? And what's going to happen if we don't do it? So you see it over here on this slide. Okay? So you'll notice it's, what's the background? Like what's prompting this? What's driving this? You have it on your paper. What challenges or problems do we face that we need to address? Right? Our annual campaign, less engagement, reduction in participation or in participants or members or whatever those issues are. What's driving change in demographics in our community, et cetera, et cetera. And what's going to happen if we don't do anything about it? If we stay the same and nothing changes, what's going to happen?
It's going to fail.
Make honest projections for yourself, whatever it is. You know your community and you know your organization, you know the answers. Or at least you will put it out there for conversation. And what do we have to let go of in order to be able to move forward? What are the sacred cows that we might not be able to continue to maintain? And what are the processes and procedures and ways of doing things that are no longer relevant in the year 2017? That might have been relevant when the organization was founded in 1977, 40 years ago, or however long it is. Okay? What will the change require in cost and in other? And by the way, the other can often be more expensive than the actual dollars. Right? The change in equity. What will it cost in terms of people not liking our direction and choosing to opt out? What are the risks here? And then finally, what will success look like? These are hard questions. This is not a 5-minute exercise. But it is an exercise that can be extremely valuable to you when you look at what it is that you really want to do. You have to say to yourself, but if I don't answer this question over here and over here, if I don't look at 2 and 3, I'm not going to ever get the momentum, the motivation. We all know when change happens. Change happens when we're in deep trouble, in many cases. Sometimes we rush to change, and that's what we talk about getting into trouble because we go too fast. But ultimately, there's always a motivator. People don't change just because, we might change our necktie, we might change our shoes, that kind of thing will change because we don't want to look the same every day. But in terms of organizational structure, we're not looking for change unless there's a driver. So the driver has to be compelling. The driver is what's going to sustain it. But you still have to have a plan behind it. You can't just change into nothingness. You have to change into a clearly defined direction. Okay? So now that we know that change is necessary, what is the vision of the new reality? Let's get it as crystal clear as we can. The more adjectives, the more descriptors, the more that we can sort of envision it in our mind's eye, the more you'll actually subconsciously, there's a lot of research about this, that subconsciously you will be, people talk about this, Tony Robbins and others, the idea that if you envision yourself financially and otherwise as living a different life, a more purposeful life, a more financially free life, a life where you have more time to yourself and your family, whatever drives you. If you have it and you create that clarity of vision, even if you don't necessarily take clear steps towards that outcome, invariably you will start to move in that direction because your brain is already looking for solutions in the subconscious level. So if you have a clear vision of what you want, even if you haven't yet taken steps to get there, you're already going to start moving people in a thought process that will move you to a better place because you have that vision, that clarity. Okay? And then, of course, you need to take action. It's all good to have conversation, but at the end of the day, without the action, you're not getting anywhere. So those are the 3. And those 3, compounded, need to be stronger than the 4th. And the 4th should not be underestimated because we all know that resistance is really critical. Resistance is there. It's invariable. It's going to be there. Okay? So as soon as change is introduced, people are going to get defensive. You'll see it in their body language. You'll see it in their facial expressions. You'll see it in their words. You'll see it in their communication. Some people will be more confrontational, some people will withdraw. They'll take the exact opposite approach. And don't think that just because you're not hearing anything doesn't mean everybody is automatically satisfied. It just means they've chosen to take their conversation underground, or sideways, or whatever you might want to call it, whatever your metaphor might be. Okay? So, there's no way to completely deal with fear. There's no way to completely deal with resistance. Change is hard. But the more that you can do, take the steps that we've discussed, in getting people prepared, getting them on board, having them have a voice, letting them hear from you on a regular basis, filling the voids, etc., all of those kinds of things will help to mitigate fear and resistance. So the opportunity might be fantastic, right? But there are a lot of people, and if you think about it, in business and in life, a lot of people had opportunity but didn't follow through, probably because fear got in the way. And we can all relate to this. We all know stories like that. Okay. I know I've been going quickly recently, and we have a few minutes left, but is there anything related to this formula in particular that anyone wanted to comment on or ask a question about? Yes? Yes.
So
I do moonlight, by the way, as an auctioneer of fine art.
Oh, I see.
So if your hand goes up just a little bit, you may have to pay for that portrait for $4,000. But go ahead, yes.
I'm just going to get these three things out right away because I don't know where you're going to go next. So the thing about what is the vision of the new reality, if you're looking for a friend to back you up, it would be Ezekiel, who's writing to the people under the deepest slavery in Babylonia, and he's sort of telling them what the new temple is going to look like and all these things. He's putting out a vision that's so common, but it doesn't exist.
All the prophets. All the prophets. I think you
Ezekiel
can
more
say.
than any other.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Okay, fair.
The next thing is, you didn't mention, but I wish you had, is the importance.
I still could. I got 10 minutes.
All right. It's scaffolding.
It's what now?
Scaffolding.
Yeah, okay.
I remember in rabbinical school, we had to take one educational theory class.
Mhm.
It's the only thing I can remember from the class.
Okay.
So the idea that you want people to fall off the building, so if you want them to go from here to here in terms of your change, that may be where you want them to go ultimately, but they're going to fall off the building. You have to be empathetic, and so that maybe they can go here, and that's worth it. And you have to put in supports so that they can get to there without falling off the building. So it's such a visual. And
I didn't use the same term, but we did talk about education. We did talk about giving them tools. So we're on the same page, I think.
Yeah, I would. I hope so.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is that my wife always warned me about piling. That when there's so much to do, gotta do this, 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 and this, it can often lead to not doing anything.
Right.
So that maybe if you could break down the big change into small little bits or pieces of change, and then you can have those successes you talked about, so that you know where you want to go to.
Yeah.
It's related to scaffolding.
Right. No, it's a great point. There are quotes about this. I don't know if I have it here or not, but there is a quote that's coming to mind that I don't think is on your paper that has to do with the idea that there are certain ways, it might even be Eisenhower who said it, that ultimately the people think that they did it themselves. If you're really good at it, if you really know how to introduce it in a way where you're sort of asking questions, introducing ideas, you're getting their minds thinking about it, that wouldn't this outcome ultimately be better? And this, by the way, could in many cases be the best, because then you mitigate the resistance too. What you do is you're getting your people to ultimately come to that decision, quote unquote, on their own. And then they think that they were the ones who were driving it from the outset. And in reality, if you go back and take a flashback to a couple of years, the environment was completely different. And you were the driving agent, but you never took credit for it. And more importantly, you kept planting seeds and sharing ideas and giving them opportunities to learn. And next thing you know, it just took off on its own. And wouldn't that be a great way to advance change? Okay, so let's review. So number one, would anyone like to take a crack at the first question? Why is it important to manage change carefully? Any thoughts there? I know that we've discussed it, but this is just an opportunity to sort of concretize and wrap up. Why does it need a management process, sort of like a thoughtful consideration of how to do it? Yes, ma'am?
If it doesn't, if you don't, it fails.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you want to succeed, you got to manage it right. So, yes?
Also to make sure that the goals along the way are being achieved So that there's like a foundation.
Yeah, and you're keeping them focused on the end product, what you want to see at the end, which is great. Thank you. What about if you don't? Besides for obviously not, there's a parable I'll tell you because did I mention the Dubna Maggid parable with the archer the last time I came? The archer in the forest. So there was a great rabbi in the 19th century known as the Dubna Maggid. A Maggid was somebody who told stories and parables that ultimately delivered a message. And he was from the town of Dubna, so he became known as the Dubna Maggid. I don't even know his real name. Anyway, so he tells of an incident where a guy goes in the forest and there are trees everywhere, and on every tree is a bullseye painted, and in every bullseye, smack in the middle of every bullseye is an arrow, flush exactly in the center of the bullseye, a big gesund. And so he's walking and he's amazed by the accuracy of the marksman who's shooting these arrows. He says, I gotta meet this guy. He asks around and he eventually is introduced to the archer. And he says, sir, how did you develop your skill to such a degree that you hit every bullseye right in the middle? He said, oh, it's simple. I shoot the arrow, I paint the bullseye around it, right? So if we don't know where we're going, we're always there, sort of like, without your GPS, we calculate it. So you obviously need to know where you're going, otherwise you're just putting in this effort, but you never know you really got there, you didn't get there. So that's obviously critical as well. Key strategies that resonated with you. If there would be one takeaway, I remember years ago, I thought that this was such a minimalist attitude, but there's a lot of wisdom in this. Somebody who used to run educational programming in Chicago for the schools that I taught for that network, he used to say that if every teacher would come out of every workshop with one practical takeaway, that it was worth it for them to spend the 2 hours or whatever it was in that particular session. I hope there's more than one. But if you only had one, what would be the one strategy that you feel either most resonated with you, can help you most in your practice? Would anyone like to answer that question? I'll give you about 30 seconds to go back and look over your notes if you'd like to, so you don't have to feel like you have to remember it all on the spot. But if there is something like that, I'd love to hear it. Number one, just my own curiosity, but number two, I think it's important for you to feel that level of connection. So let's take another 10 seconds or so, and then I'll feel some responses. And did you want to respond?
I just wanted patience.
Patience. That it's a process. Yes, sir.
I thought your concept of small incremental wins is a good idea. I'm not exactly sure I really know how to do it in the planning process in reality, but the concept is very
It just means
good.
that as a leader, you're not trying to walk in with the sale of the Brooklyn Bridge. You're not trying to just like solve all the problems on day one. You build, win, you get a little bit of momentum, you've got small things that don't demand much of others, and then eventually when you come to the bigger stuff, you've already built some credibility. And it helps you then to advance more. Yes, ma'am?
Well, building on what Richard said, I like the whole build equity. I like all four of them. I think they're good.
Great. Yeah, that's really important. I can tell you from experience, it's really important. Yes?
So the thing that really resonated with me was the idea of positivity, and you're looking at those four.
The trust matrix?
The trust matrix. So what was the one called that was?
A, B, C, D. Which one?
Was
C, credible? Connected.
Yeah, the
Connected
one. That really spoke to me in terms of, I think our society runs so much towards negativity, and we're going to have a positive conversation, I'll tell you everything that you're doing wrong. I think that it really takes a lot of energy to tell people what they're doing right.
Yeah, and on top of it, if I may, I blog posts on all sorts of stuff. I genuinely feel that in today's day and age, we have to work harder to still, the older people in the room, I hope I can say it like this, I think have less of this issue because they weren't raised with technology. But I think while technology has connected us in many ways, it also has disconnected us in terms of the depth of our relationships. And so while you're connected virtually, electronically with people, you still want to take the time to connect with them because so much research tells us so much of our communication cannot be transferred through a computer. People can't see your voice, they hear your voice, they can't see your gestures, they don't know. And there's a lot of research that says that people think that they can determine in an email, is he serious, not serious, the intent. And we often get it wrong, because there's no context for the words, no context for the language. Any last points? Yes, in the back?
I really like the case for change document in terms of being able to present it to the group that you're trying to convince.
Yeah.
And have them work through it a little bit.
Right.
You know, you give them some guidelines, but it's a way, I think, to reduce some of the resistance, because by the time they get down to number 6, they're already talking about success.
Yeah, and on top of it, they're the ones who are acknowledging the issues and doing the work. The more you get them in, right, it's easy. The easy way is come up with all the ideas. I mean, if you're just that kind of thinker, the easy thing is just do it all on your own. Come up with all the ideas, map out the plan. Nobody wants to be bothered with it, blah, blah, blah. But really, that is the long way, because oftentimes you then have to undo a lot of the equity-related damage that you create by not creating the foundation.
It's also hard to replicate. So if you have one person doing everything, that person theoretically is not going to live forever or outlast the agency. So you need to bring people along and nurture them.
And then with succession planning and all these kinds of things, part of it is nurturing your young leaders and giving them opportunities to grow into. And young leaders in particular, again, it's a different topic, but what they say, I hate to overgeneralize about 70 million people, but they say consistently about Gen Y is that they need to be involved. They need to have a voice. And I think the school leaders can attest to that. I think others in the room can attest to that. And so as we give, as we seek, because I think that is something on people's minds, is what I've heard in some of my conversations with individuals in this room, the idea that getting young people to feel more invested and committed to your community and all that it stands for, the only way really to do it is to find ways. It's not always easy because time is short, but find creative ways to bring the young people in and give them an opportunity and a voice to share what they have to say, roll up their sleeves, and make an impact. Everybody wants to, but I think that's the way that you get people to come back to those meetings. So I think at this point, what I would have done is to have you review the quote changes. We don't have time for that, but I'm sorry, the change quotes. But look at them when you have a chance, because I think you'll find them to be enlightening. And either way, at this point, I think I'm going to hand oh yes, there is a paper here as well. You're welcome. I encourage you, if you're interested in some of what I talked about, a lot of it made its way into Becoming the New Boss, which is the book that is going to be published next month. Thank you, Seth and Wendy, for the opportunity just to share that. And this QR code, if you have a QR reader, it'll bring you directly to the website. You can find out a little bit more. You can enter your information, get a sample chapter, and also when more information comes out, you'll be on the front and center knowing all about it so that you can get it and, of course, pass it on to all of your friends and family. But I thank you. This is not about me. This is about you. You did a great job. And it's an honor to be able to engage with you tonight. And previously, I've learned a lot, and I really feel very inspired that that our conversation hopefully will lead to good places. So thank you all for the opportunity.
So how about another round of applause?